Following the killing of George Floyd, nationwide protests against police brutality toward Black Americans have themselves been met with widespread and egregious violence by police. Forensic architecture and Bellingcat have verified and located video evidence of this violence and placed it within an interactive platform, totaling over 1,000 incidents from 43 states. This archive evidences the claims made by dozens of organizations that have publicly denounced the ongoing brutality, including UN experts, who demanded an independent inquiry into systemic racism and state-sponsored racial violence. The platform lets us categorize the data in different ways, such as when officers use tear gas, pepper spray, or so-called less lethal rounds, and explore patterns of abuse across time and space, such as attacks against medics, which we have so far identified in at least 7 states. Here in Austin, for example, individuals clearly marked with red crosses are carrying a visibly wounded man when officers open fire on them, while medics were physically assaulted by police officers in New York and in Portland. The platform also reveals nearly 200 attacks against journalists, such as here in Los Angeles, where a reporter is brutally thrown to the ground and arrested. The scale of these attacks points to a systematic disregard for fundamental press freedoms. In Philadelphia, an officer uses pepper spray on civilians who are clearly not resisting, in direct violation of his department's own policies. While here in Los Angeles, we see officers escalating a standoff, firing hundreds of less lethal rounds at retreating protesters, making no effort to de-escalate as required by policy. Out of this data emerges a picture of police departments that behave more like paramilitaries than public servants. Some jurisdictions, including New York City, Virginia, and Colorado, have responded to this lawlessness by passing police reform legislation. But videos from the months since those bills passed show that they have so far failed to rein in the violence. A more common response was to further vilify protesters and empower police through state of emergency declarations that restrict civilians' right to protest. Across the country, hundreds of curfew orders created zones of exception, which encourage and legitimize violence. Including attacking civilians on private property.
Go inside now! Get in the house!
And kettling protesters to stop them from leaving, before using violence against them. The platform presents evidence for this kind of kettling in at least 8 states. Other jurisdictions, such as Rochester, New York, have permitted their officers to hide their identities. Here in Portland, a similar anonymity has given federal agents license to operate like secret police.
What is going on? Who are you?
Abductions like these are not the only instances of Portland's residents being subjected to authoritarian violence by unaccountable federal agents. In September, for example, Portland banned local police from using tear gas, but the city could not prevent federal agents from continuing to use it in their streets. Here we see local officers, identifiable by their arm patches, using the cover of these attacks to make sweeping arrests. Their gas masks suggest that they were cooperating with federal agencies, despite their public denials. Federal agents in Portland have also deployed grenades containing hexachloroethane, a hazardous waste chemical, and a likely human carcinogen. In September, local police were even deputized as federal agents in response to a rally by a far-right hate group, the Proud Boys. That rally, which included many individuals armed and wearing military gear, was clearly policed more gently than the city's militarized response to recent Black Lives Matter protests. Our data shows that this double standard is common across the country. When heavily armed, white supremacist militias gathered in Louisville, Kentucky in early September, police presence was minimal. Compare that to the response of officers in the same city to a Black Lives Matter protest later that month. In Olympia, Washington, an officer smiles and poses with a militia group. While in Salem, Oregon, an officer gives advice to a militia group about how to stay out of trouble after curfew.
So we don't look like we're playing favorites.
By comparison, in Richmond, Virginia, officers tear-gassed a Black Lives Matter protest around 20 minutes before curfew began. The available evidence clearly points to a systemic crisis in policing.
Please don't shoot us.
We and our partners will continue to analyze these patterns of abuse in support of legal action and movement demands for abolition.